Finally today, with input costs on the rise in crop production, you may want to consider making the use of manure in order to offset some of those rising fertilizer costs. At this year's Women in Ag event in Kearney, Nebraska, Extension educator Leslie Johnson shared insight into the magic of manure. Market Journal's Bill Dodd brings us this story.
Input costs for virtually all Nebraska row crops have continued to climb in the last year, with little indication of prices going down anytime soon. One major component of any cropping system is the use of fertilizer. With that in mind, manure is one alternative producers can turn to try and offset some of those fertilizer input cost increases. However, before you make any applications, soil testing should be your first priority.
And you should soil sample before you apply manure, but always do it before manure application. I will occasionally get somebody that calls and say, well, I want to account for those manure nutrients, and so I'm sampling afterwards. And a soil sample is a snapshot on that day. So because nitrogen becomes available from manure over time, it's not going to tell you what is available to your crop 2 months from now, 2 weeks from now, even 2 years from now, because nitrogen does become available over the course of 3-4 years from manure. And then if you're going to apply manure multiple years or after a few years, sample again. And if you're going to do it in the spring, always do it in the spring. Whatever you do, do it consistently. So if you're going to apply manure in the fall, you need to sample before that application. But if you're going to apply in the spring, it might be hard, but you need to get that soil sample before then, so you can base that nitrogen rate or that manure rate on those nutrients that are in the soil. So anything that you have in your manure should be utilized as a fertilizer. So getting that sample and knowing what you have in there is really important.
Like all things in life, there can be drawbacks to any decision. However, Leslie tells us when it comes to utilizing manure on your operation, if you're doing things properly, the only drawback to making use of manure as fertilizer could be minor water concerns and perhaps a complaint or two from a neighbor about odor.
I would say there's not really drawbacks. Of course, there's always the neighbor issue, because manure does have an odor to it most of the time. There are some products that don't really have an odor to them, but most of the time that's the biggest issue. There are some water quality concerns if you're not doing it properly, but if you're applying that manure on an agronomic basis, so it's just meeting the crop needs, there's really not a lot of concern. If you get a hard rain right after you've applied, you're more likely to lose some of those nutrients, and and that can cause water quality problems. But mostly, if you're doing it right, you're probably not causing a problem.
When it comes to how much manure you'll need to make your applications, it all boils down to your soil needs and making sure that you don't exceed the tolerable amount of nitrogen to ensure leaching doesn't become an issue.
So it's going to depend on your operation and what you have available. If you just have a certain amount of manure available, just knowing how much nutrients that you've applied with that manure, then you can not offset, but you reduce your fertilizer by that amount. So it just depends on the operation. If you have enough manure to meet all of your nitrogen needs, you can do that. But you don't want to go past that nitrogen need. So sometimes in order to meet all of your phosphorus needs for 1 or 2 years, it might be more than the amount of nitrogen that you need, but you should never go over that amount of nitrogen, because that nitrogen is going to leach into the soil and it eventually gets to our groundwater. And so it's a potential contaminant that you definitely need to manage.
If you want to procure manure for your operation but don't know where to start, have no fear. UNL has an app for that. However, beyond university resources that can assist producers in obtaining a sufficient amount of manure for their operations, Leslie tells us some people you may already know may be willing to simply give you what you need if you're willing to ask.
The university actually we have a manure app, and while it's not going to get you directly to a manure source, it will put you in touch with consultants that are working with livestock operations. Sometimes it's just knocking on the neighbor's door and asking them, do you have that extra manure? Can we get some? Sometimes they're glad to get rid of it. Sometimes their land is already applied to, and they need a place to get rid of it, and so they'll gladly give it to you. Other times you're going to have to pay for that manure. It just depends. But knocking on the neighbor's door is one way. The university actually has an app. It's available through our manure.unl.edu website. That app does, like I said, it does not get you in touch with the manure person directly, but it will get you in contact with consultants and brokers that have access to manure. And the other part of that app is it gets access to our manure team. So if you have questions for any manure related question, all of our all of our University of Nebraska Extension people that are involved with manure have their contact information in there, and you can find somebody local to you, or you can come talk to me because I'm a statewide.
While manure has its benefits as a fertilizer, it shouldn't be overlooked that manure can usually be locally sourced and cuts down on the need for fertilizers to be shipped via trucks, ships, and trains over long distances. When properly applying manure in your fields, you're essentially applying a byproduct that was likely created from the commodities being produced on that land, in effect, helping to create a circular economy. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.